Her husband left for a simple hunting trip and never came back for 10 years. No one believed her. Not the police, not the press, not even the so-called friends who returned without him. But when a rusted truck surfaced in a scrap yard with a dead stranger in the passenger seat, everything she feared was confirmed. And what happened next shook the entire country. Welcome to Minority Struggles. If this story hits home, subscribe and let me know where you're listening from and what time is right now. Now, let's begin. Ruth Hull, a 54-year-old wife to Tobias Hull, had never liked hunting trips. She didn't like the way they pulled her husband away, didn't like the silence of the woods, didn't like the thought of Tobias sleeping under a sky so dark it swallowed sound. But every November, like clockwork, he and his friends loaded up the old red pickup and drove out past the edge of Franklin County to a patch of forest they swore held the best deer in Ohio that year. 10 years ago. He kissed her on the forehead, promised he'd bring home venison for the freezer, and said he'd be back by Sunday. Sunday never came. Ruth remembered that morning like a scar she could trace with her fingers. She was in her wheelchair, by the stove, flipping bacon with one hand and balancing Maya's school permission slip in the other Corey. Their eldest, at 17, had already gone out to mow lawns for cash. He was always hustling, trying to be the man of the house before his time. Jamal, just a year younger, at 16, was helping her set the table with quiet care. Tiana, 15, and Maya, 13, bickered nearby about a missing hairbrush like nothing in the world could ever go wrong in Tobias. He walked in, smelled the bacon, and laughed. "You all better save me some," he said, grabbing his coat. "You'd better bring back something worth all this worry," Ruth muttered, rolling her eyes. "If you come back empty-handed again, I'm making you eat tofu for a week." "I'd survive." He grinned, then leaned in. "But I miss you too much." He was wearing his lucky boots, the ones with the mud still crusted on the heels from last year's hunt. Ruth watched the truck disappear down the drive and thought nothing of it. She didn't know it would be the last time she'd see him. 3 days later, she got the call. "Tobias never came back," said Calvin Reyes, his longtime friend from the job site. "We split up in pairs, just like always." He went off toward the ridge before sunset. I waited. I called. We searched nothing. Not a sound, not a trail. Panic swallowed her whole. She called every hospital, every station, every ranger post. Within 100 miles, when the police arrived, they took the statement with tired eyes and scripted sympathy. "Men go missing in the woods all the time," one deputy said. "Could have gotten lost, could have run off any history of stress. Money problems. He wouldn't run," she snapped. And he knew those woods better than he knew our street. Still, no dogs were called in. No helicopters. No real urgency. The case never even made the evening news. Ruth was told to wait. To hope. She waited a year, then 2, then 5, then 10. During that time, Ruth's world shrank to the size of their home. The old farmhouse creaked with memories. His boots still sat by the door. His laugh echoed in old birthday videos. And the bed always felt too wide after her spinal injury left her in a wheelchair. Tobias had been her arms, her legs, her everything. He never once made her feel like a burden. She always feared she'd be the one to go first. But instead, he vanished like smoke, and the silence he left behind was worse than death. Corey stepped up too fast and too angry. He left school to work full-time, his eyes always scanning the horizon like he expected his father to walk out of the woods one day. Jamal grew quieter, retreating into books and car repairs. Tiana turned her grief into ambition and applied to every law program she could find. And Maya, sweet. Maya barely spoke of her father at all. She just hugged Ruth, tighter at night, like trying to patch the holes grief had left behind. Ruth kept a photo of Tobias on the mantle. Not one in camouflage or hunting gear, just a simple snapshot of him under the oak tree. In the backyard, all 4 kids piled on his lap, their laughter frozen in time. She talked to that photo more than she talked to most people. "I know you didn't leave me," she'd whisper. "I know you didn't walk away. Everyone else moved on. The world forgot." Tobias, halt, no body, no clue, just a line in a report that said presumed dead. But Ruth never stopped calling, never stopped digging. She refused to believe that a man like her husband, so rooted in his family, would just disappear without a trace. Then, on the 10th anniversary of his disappearance, everything changed. It started with a phone call from a scrapyard 3 counties north. An officer told her they'd found an abandoned red truck in a drainage ravine behind a condemned warehouse. The registration matched her husband's. Ruth's heart stopped. Was he inside? "No, ma'am," the officer said, voice hesitant. "There was a man inside, but it wasn't your husband, and he was dead." The world tilted beneath her. Then who was he? "We don't know yet, but we're reopening the case." There were some concerning details: blood marks, chains in the back of the truck bed. Chains, the word clawed through her mind. That night, she stared at her reflection in the window and barely recognized the woman staring back. Older, thinner, hollowed out by grief. But her eyes still burned with the same fire. She picked up the phone and made 4 calls. Corey was the first to arrive. The next morning, slamming into the kitchen with clenched fists and burning eyes. "If he's not in that truck, then where the hell is he?" "We're going to find out," Ruth said. "I'm not sitting still anymore." Jamal showed up next. Then, Tiana's suitcase still in hand. Maya arrived last. Quiet but alert, always watching. They gathered at the kitchen table where Tobias had once carved his initials into the wood. 10 years had passed. 10 birthdays, 10 Christmases, 10 empty chairs. But suddenly, something had shifted for the first time in a decade. It felt like the beginning. Ruth looked around at her children, grown now, hardened by loss, but still hers. "Your father didn't disappear," she said quietly. "He was taken, and we're going to bring him home." They didn't ask how, they didn't argue, because the holes were done waiting. They were going to war. The officer who called Ruth had given her the scrap yard's address, and now she sat parked outside it, arms folded over her lap, her wheelchair folded in the back of Corey's van. The air in Franklin County felt heavier than usual. The lot was quiet, the kind of quiet that made people uneasy. Piles of rusted metal lined the fence beyond them. She could see the ridge, the same ridge Tobias had supposedly disappeared near. Her stomach clenched. "This is where they found the truck," Corey muttered, jaw tight. Ruth didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the spot, just beyond the trees, where a wrecker had pulled Tobias's red pickup out of the ravine. She could still hear his voice in her head, teasing Warm alive. "I'll be back by Sunday." Sunday never came. A detective met them near the front gate. His name was Nolan Rhodes, mid-40s, sharp suit, weary face. He extended a hand, but Ruth didn't take it. "I appreciate y'all coming," he said. "We reopened the file as a missing person case with suspicious circumstances. What we found inside the truck, it's enough to warrant deeper investigation." "What about the man?" "Inside?" Jamal asked from behind Ruth. "Has he been identified?" "Not yet." "Caucasian male, middle, late 40s? "No." "ID dental records?" "Inconclusive." "He was restrained." Corey's fists clenched at his sides. "Restrained? How ankle cuffs, burn marks. Evidence of long-term confinement." The words hit like bricks. Ruth looked up, her voice cold. "So someone was using my husband's truck. Like a prison." Nola nodded once. "That's what it looks like." He led them to the evidence room where they viewed photos. Grainy shots of the interior, blood on the seat rope fibers, a steel chain anchored to the rear of the truck bed, and taped to the inside of the glove box was something else. A receipt from a convenience store, dated 6 years. After Tobias vanished, Jamal blinked. "Wait, that's not possible." "It is." No one said. "The timestamp and store records confirm someone was driving that truck 6 years ago. And it wasn't your father. Which means he might have still been alive." "Back then," Maya whispered, barely able to get the words out. Tiana stepped forward. "Have you traced the chain?" "The parts somebody welded that into the truck were working on it," Nolan said. "But this thing, it's bigger than we thought." He turned to Ruth. "Did Tobias owe anyone money?" Ruth hesitated. She'd buried that truth for years. "He borrowed once," she said, "a long time ago. Right after I was injured, for medical bills, from a man named Walter Doss." Nolan looked up sharply. "Doss? You know him." "I know his son, Harvey Doss. Walter died a few years back, but the name still comes up in trafficking investigations. Forced labor, underground farms. They've been hard to pin down, operate through shell companies. But Harvey's still active." Ruth's heart pounded. The air in the room felt electric. Her instincts screamed. This was it. This was the piece she'd never been able to find. Tobias hadn't vanished. He'd been taken. "Look into Harvey," she said, her voice low and steel hard, "because I guarantee you that's where you'll find my husband." That night, back at the house, the siblings gathered in the living room. Tiana was on her laptop, digging through business registries and tax filings. Jamal scrolled through old Facebook posts from people in the area. Corey paced by the window, occasionally glancing at his phone. Maya, quiet as always, sat beside Ruth, one hand on her shoulder. "There's a warehouse up north," Tiana said suddenly. "It's owned by Doss Freight Holdings. Same region as the scrapyard. Records say it was vacated last year. But locals say trucks still come in every few days. No signage, no business." "Front sounds like a front," Jamal said. "Exactly. And get this. 2 years ago, a complaint was filed against the company by a man who claimed he escaped a labor camp run out of Doss facility." Corey stopped pacing, and he disappeared before the interview could happen. "Just gone." Ruth's throat tightened. "That's them. That's where he is, Mom," Ma said carefully. "What if he's not alive anymore?" Ruth turned her slowly. Then, I want the truth. I want his name. Cleared, I want justice. They drove out the next morning. Rose, stay behind her body, no longer allowed long travel, but she made them promise to record everything. Corey took the lead. Jamal drove. Tiana brought a duffel bag filled with cameras, flashlights, notebooks. Maya packed a first aid kit. Nobody knew what they were walking into. The warehouse sat on the edge of a forgotten road, surrounded by pine and silence, no signs, no activity. But tire tracks in the dirt told them it had been used recently. The chain link fence around it had been reinforced with wire. They circled to the back. There are hidden behind stacked crates. They found a service door, slightly ajar. Corey reached for the flashlight. Jamal raised a crowbar. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of broken machinery, shipping pallets, and empty crates. But farther in, they found something else. Steel doors, dozens of them, like cages. One had scratch marks near the latch. Someone lived in here, Tiana whispered. Multiple people. They split up filming everything. Jamal entered. What looked like a makeshift office. On the wall, covered in dust, was a bulletin board pinned to it. Were notes, some faded to nothing, but one stuck out. A photograph, faded, bent, but unmistakable. It was Tobias, standing beside another man, both of them wearing work gloves and stained shirts in the background. The same warehouse. Jamal grabbed the photo and called the others back home. Ruth stared at it, like her lungs had stopped working. "That's him," she whispered. "That's your father." "And he was alive," Corey said. "He was here." Tiana looked at the timestamp on the back 7 years ago. A long silence. Then Ruth leaned forward. "We have to go public." Tiana nodded. "I'll call a journalist. Someone who won't bury it." Corey turned to Ruth. "We're not stopping now. Not until we bring him home." Ruth nodded, her voice shaking. "No more silence, because if Tobias Hole was still alive, then somewhere, someone was still holding him in the hold for coming." "You said Tiana hadn't slept in nearly 2 days. Her legal brain ran on fumes and adrenaline, sifting through everything they gathered. Photos, receipts, warehouse footage. The timestamp on that worn photograph of Tobias standing in stained work clothes 7 years after he was declared presumed dead. She was used to building cases, constructing arguments, but this wasn't just the case anymore. It was her father, and they were closer than they'd ever been. Her contact in the media, Trina Bell, had agreed to meet the family in person. Trina had been a junior reporter when Tobias first went missing, back when no one cared enough to cover a black father vanishing in the woods. But now, 10 years later, she was the host of a viral investigative podcast called The Cold Trail. Tiana trusted her. Trina met them at a diner just outside Franklin County. She wore a gray coat and boots, caked with travel dust, hair tied back, and a recorder already rolling. Her voice was calm but curious as she sat across from the whole family. "Before we begin," she said, "I want you to understand something. If I tell this story, I'm not just airing a segment, I'm digging. That means pressure. That means names. That means enemies. Are you ready for that?" Ruth, seated beside Corey in her wheelchair, nodded. "We've been ready for 10 years. Trina hit record. It took 2 hours for them to lay it all out. Ruth's accident, Tobias's loyalty, the hunting trip, The missing person report, the lack of police effort, the abandoned truck. The photo, the Doe's family name Trina didn't interrupt much, just took notes, asked questions, zoomed in. When Corey showed her the warehouse footage and the cages chains, Trina whispered. Actual chains, they turned that place into a labor prison, Jamal said, and no one ever came looking. Trina leaned forward. He said, Tobias borrowed from Walter Doss. What exactly did he borrow for? Ruth's voice cracked from me after my spinal injury. I had mounting hospital bills, rehab equipment, home modifications. He was too proud to tell the kids, too desperate to let me suffer. He went to Walter. He thought it was a loan. Trina's mouth tightened. It was a leash. She promised to push the story by morning. But I want to warn you, she said, turning off the recorder. The Doss family's name has come up before. Whispers in law enforcement, sealed affidavit. Missing people in poor counties, but always gets buried. If this gains traction, they won't just threaten, they'll act. Corey met her eyes. Let them. Trina left that night, and by the next afternoon, the Cold Trail podcast had a new title, trending on every app, The Man Who Vanished Twice. It opened with Ruth's voice raw, determined, and saying, They said he walked away, but I know he didn't, because no man who loves his family disappears without a fight. The episode exploded. Local news picked it up. Then national blogs. Ruse didn't stop buzzing for hours, and that's when the threat arrived. It came in the form of an unmarked envelope, slid under their front door. While Ruth napped in the den, Tiana was the one who found it. No name, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, an overhead shot of the whole farmhouse on the back stay. Quiet or join him. Jamal paced the floor, fists clenched. They're watching us. They know we're getting close. Corey checked the security cams he'd installed after the warehouse trip. Nothing. No faces, no cars, just the wind. Ruth looked at the photo and didn't flinch. Let them watch. I'm not hiding. The next morning, Nolan Rhodes, the same detective who had reopened the case, called with news the dead man in Tobias's truck had been identified. Brent Lurie, a former Doss Farm employee with a sealed record, he was reported missing by his sister 8 years ago. Nolan said, toxicology shows severe malnourishment burns. He didn't die. In that crash, he died somewhere else and was moved stage. Tiana asked, Exactly. Someone wanted that truck found, and they wanted us to think it was Tobias inside. Ruth closed her eyes. Then someone's cleaning up, which means they're scared, Corey said. And when people get scared, they make mistakes that same week. Maya got a call at her job from a block number. She worked as a community outreach counselor for teens in trouble, and her office line rarely rang after hours, but the voice on the other end was quiet. Older, ragged. Is this Maya? Halt, the man asked. Who is this? I can't give you my name, but I knew your father. Back when they kept him, Mia's blood ran cold. Where they moved us around. Farms, junkyards, construction sites. He protected people, took beatings for us, said he had a family waiting. Maya's voice cracked. Is he alive? I don't know. I escaped 3 years ago. I'm in a shelter in Kentucky now. You want to check? A place near Columbus, Black River Property Management. They changed names a year ago. She hung up and called Tiana instantly by nightfall. The holes were packed in a Corey's van, driving toward the Ohio border. The address led them to a crumbling warehouse outside Columbus, abandoned on the outside, but the power was still on. As they crept through the shadows, Jamal whispered, This looks just like the first place. Corey nodded. Except someone's still using it. They found evidence fast: CS, food wrappers, metal tools, a work schedule written in pencil on the wall. Under one cot, a name etched into the frame. Ruth ran her fingers over the letters like they were sacred. He was here, she whispered. He's still here, somewhere. They took photos, packed what they could, and by the next day, they'd given it all to Nolan Rhodes. The detective called them to the precinct, too. 2 days later, they were greeted not just by Nolan, but by 2 FBI agents in gray suits. We believe we've identified 2 former DOS enforcers still active in Ohio. One agent said, "We're going to pick them up for questioning." Ruth looked them dead in the eyes. Get them a talk. The arrests made the news. The suspects were seen being taken from a Cleveland apartment complex in cuffs. And that same night, the interrogation tapes leaked. One of them whispered about a man being kept in the tunnels of an old mine site near Toledo. "He's still alive," the man said, voice trembling. "I swear it. The boss wouldn't let him die, said he was useful." Ruth stopped breathing. Tiana stood, phone still, playing the recording. "That's it. That's where he is." Jamal grabbed the keys. Corey looked at his mother. "Say the word," he told her. Ruth's eyes gleamed with tears and rage. "Let's go get your father." It was Tiana who first said it aloud. "They didn't just cover this up," she muttered, flipping through a thick folder of redacted files at Rose's kitchen table. They buried it. She had come home 3 days after the news about the truck. A civil rights attorney, now sharper than steel and twice as relentless, she'd flown in from Baltimore with a suitcase full of legal pads and fire in her eyes across from her ma. Scrolled through her laptop, lips tight. She was the quiet one, but not anymore now. A data analyst for a cybersecurity firm, she was running names through databases, linking faces to shell companies and tax records. Jamal stood at the sink with a dish towel over his shoulder, listening. He hadn't said much since he'd driven his mother to the scrapyard and saw the rusted truck with Tobias's initials still carved into the dashboard, and Ruth. Ruth sat at the head of the table, hands clasped, eyes on a photo that never left her side, her husband, her children. The last time they'd all been whole, Harvey Doss Moss said quietly, still alive, operating under a different company name. "He's not in hiding. He's just changed the logo." Jamal turned. "How do you know?" She spun the laptop on the screen. Was a list of construction sites, all owned by a network of companies tied back to DOSs. Different names, different paperwork, same addresses, same workers, mostly undocumented, mostly vanished. "I think they moved the operation north," she said, out of Tennessee. "Probably to avoid state-level heat. West Virginia, Ohio, maybe Kentucky. I've been cross-referencing job sites with missing persons reports." Ruth exhaled sharply. "And too many matches to be a coincidence." Tiana leaned in. "So he just keeps doing it. After all these years." "No convictions," Jamal said bitterly. "No one ever stopped him." The room fell silent. Then Corey walked in, his face, bruised knuckles, bandaged eyes burning. "They know we're looking." Ruth wheeled toward him. "What happened?" "I got jumped. Leaving my job site." 2 guys said nothing. "Just fists." He paused. "But they left a message." He pulled a crumpled note from his pocket and tossed it onto the table. Maya unfolded it. Your daddy's gone. You better be too. Ruth's breath caught. That's a threat. It's a warning, Corey said, and it means we're getting close. They called the police, filed a report, but everyone in the room knew nothing would come of it. Doss had deep pockets. Local law was just another shield. That night, Ruth made a decision. She called an old friend, Trina Bell, a journalist who had covered a labor trafficking story years ago that no one else dared to touch. Trina drove down from Chicago the next morning with a camera, a notepad, and a look in her eye that said she wasn't afraid of ghosts. I've been tracking Doss for years. She told them, every time I thought I had something, it vanished. Records, deleted, victims too scared to talk, lawyers threatening to sue. But now, how about the hook? A missing black father, a grieving family, and a truck that shows he never ran. She interviewed them all. Ruth, Corey, Tiana, Maya, even Jamal, who hated cameras, spoke. The footage went viral. Trina's expose was viewed over 1 million times within 3 days. Comments poured in, tips trickled in. And then a message landed in Corey's inbox. No name, no subject line, just a photo. It was a blurry, aerial shot of a compound in the woods. Fences, trailers, half-constructed buildings, and a single line of text. Try looking here. The GPS coordinates pointed to southern Ohio, a construction site listed as Doss Aggregates, LLC. Corey stared at it. This is real. Then we go, Jamal said, not without backup. Tiana warned. We need evidence. We need leverage. Ruth nodded. And we need to be careful. They've hurt one of mine already. I won't let it happen again. They spent the next week digging deeper. Trina used her contacts to pull satellite imagery and old permits. Maya hacked into job listings and cross-cheat employee rosters. Tiana subpoenaed records through her firm. Corey and Jamal began prepping cameras, backup, batteries, and burner phones at night. Ruth sat by her window and prayed. She wasn't sure to who, but she whispered Tobias's name like a promise. And then just before dawn, on a cold Sunday morning, they made their move. The family, Corey, Jamal, and Trina, drove 6 hours to the site. It was exactly as described, remote, fenced, guarded. They parked in the trees and watched from a distance. Through binoculars, Corey saw men moving bricks, hauling gravel, too thin, too slow, too scared. They're not workers, he said. They're prisoners. Trina filmed. Jamal took notes, but they didn't go in. Not yet. When they got back, Maya Cross referenced every phase caught on camera for matched missing persons reports from 3 different states. They had proof, and it was time to strike louder. Trina published a second piece. Ruth gave a speech at a local church that was streamed live. Tiana filed a formal complaint to the DOJ. Hashtags exploded across social media. Where is Tobias Dosma's fall? Lack families matter. And then 2 days later, on T, unmarked, van parked across from their house. The windows were tinted, the plates removed, and nobody stepped out. It sat there for 3 hours when it finally drove off. Corey stared after it and said, We've pissed them off. Good, Ruth said, wheeling into the living room. Let them know we're not scared. But inside, she was terrified. They didn't know where Tobias was or if he was even alive. But they knew one thing now. With chilling certainty, he hadn't disappeared. He'd been erased. And the people who did it were still watching. But so were they. And this time, the Holts were coming armed with proof. with names with fire in their blood, and they were going to burn the whole damn empire down. The raid came at dawn. No headlines, no warning. Just 20 black SUVs rolling through a sleepy Ohio town. Headlights off, silence, heavier than thunder. The Department of Justice, now acting on the overwhelming evidence Ruth's family had pulled together, had sanctioned a full-scale operation. Ruth wasn't there in person, but she was on the call, listening, clutching a rosary she hadn't touched in years therein, Trina whispered, from the car parked 2 miles from the Dawes compound. Her camera was rolling. Her hands were shaking within minutes. Agents swarmed. The property they breached, the fences kicked indoors and pulled, screaming men from bunkhouses reeking of diesel and despair behind the trailers. They found makeshift cages, some empty, others. Not 37 men and women were rescued that day. Some were undocumented. Some were reported missing. All of them were too terrified to speak at first until one of them, a man from Kentucky, whispered a name through cracked lips. Tobias, he said. He was here. Ruth's heart stopped. The man continued. They kept calling him the mule, said he owed them double. He was strong, too strong, so they moved him to another site when he tried to run, where Corey barked from behind the phone, but the man only shook his head. I never saw where. Just that. It was colder, darker mountains. Maybe Harvey Doss was found inside a trailer, counting money when the agents burst in. He didn't flinch. He sat back, smirked, and said, "Took you long enough." He didn't resist, neither did the two enforcers with him. Men the family recognized from grainy surveillance footage Maya had uncovered. They were zip-tied, shoved into vans, and driven away without ceremony. But Doss wouldn't talk for 2 days. He sat in a sterile room at the DOJ field office, in silence, sipping water, staring at the wall like he was waiting for the clock to run out. Then someone had an idea. Ruth sent a framed photo to Tobias with the kids under the old oak tree. Tiana slid it across the metal table during interrogation and said nothing. Doss looked at it and smirked. Still breathing, he said barely. Tiana stood up so fast, her chair tipped over. Where is he? But Doss just leaned back. He ain't dead yet. You want him. You'd better hurry. That was enough. Back in the office, agents tore apart every document seized from Doss's trailer. Jamal, helping sort through the scan files, spotted a folded map inside a manila envelope. Labeled dead zones on, there were 6 sites circled in red. 5 had already been searched. The 6th, a mine abandoned, collapsed, nestled in the woods of rural West Virginia. The coordinates were scribbled in the corner. No company name. No workers listed, just one word. Mule? Ruth felt the breath leave her lungs. Corey stood up, fist clench. We're going. Wait for the agents, Tiana snapped. We do this by the book. But no one was listening anymore. The family packed into the van. Trina followed, in her car. Federal agents weren't far behind, but the halts were already moving. The road twisted like a scar. Through the mountains, trees leaned in close, hiding secrets in their shadows. As they neared the site, Ruth could feel something, a pull, a presence. The mine looked abandoned. From the outside, the fence had long since rusted. The warning signs were faded, but something about it felt alive, like it was holding its breath. The lead agent stepped forward with a flashlight and crowbar. The family waited. Then came the sound, a low groan. Not the wind from inside, the agent called out. Is anyone in there? Silence. Then 3 knocks. Maya covered her mouth. Jamal grabbed Corey's arm. Ruth's hands trembled in her lap. The door was forced open. The agents slipped inside, guns drawn. What followed was chaos. Voices yelling, a radio squawked, "We've got movement." And then came the words Ruth had waited a decade to hear. "We've got survivors." She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just sat there as Corey collapsed to his knees, sobbing. Tiana dropped her phone. Jamal stepped back like he'd been struck. But it wasn't over. The agent ran back out, his voice cracking. There are 3 men alive. One of them fits the photo. He's emaciated, barely conscious. But he said, "His name is Tobias." Ruth screamed, not in fear. In hope they wouldn't let her inside, not yet. But they let her hear his voice over the radio as paramedics moved in. She held it to her ear. Static. And then Ruth. She broke. "I told you. I'd never stop looking," she whispered. Tears pouring down her cheeks. "I knew you'd come," he rasped. And just like that, the war was over. The next battle, his recovery, was only beginning. But the man they tried to erase from history was alive. And the family they tried to break, they just made history. The rain hadn't let up for days. Gray skies hung heavy over the mountains of West Virginia as Ruth Holt sat in the back seat of the government SUV, clutching a photo of her husband like it was a piece of his soul. Her children flanked her. Corey, jaw tight and fist clenched. Maya, eyes red from crying but glued to her tablet, tracking every movement. Jamal holding Ruth's hand to keep her grounded, and Tiana whispering prayers under her breath. The federal agents in the front spoke in hushed tones, communicating through radios. They were less concerned with the rain and more focused on what lay ahead. The abandoned mine compound circled on the map they found in Harvey Doss's office, the same one he smirked at before muttering, "He's still breathing." Barely. It wasn't confirmation, but it was enough. They arrived just after dawn. The mine sat tucked behind thick woods, hidden from all signs of life. Fences collapsed under ivy, machinery rusted into the soil. It didn't look like a prison, but Ruth knew better. The agents moved quickly, guns drawn, voices low. They split into 2 groups, sweeping the perimeter. Jamal stayed with Ruth in the SUV, while the others followed the team into the compound. Corey wouldn't let anyone stop him. They moved past the old shack into a rock tunnel. Partially collapsed. Flashlights danced along the dirt path. The air was damp, rotten. Then a voice crackled over the radio. "We found something." A second later, "We've got man 3 alive." Corey shoved past the last agent and ducked through the opening. The chamber was barely lit, but the sight froze him where he stood. 3 men chained filthy, skin stretched tight over bones. 2 stared at the light with vacant eyes, but one of them looked up, and Corey's knees buckled. "Daddy," he whispered. The man blinked slowly, his beard thick with dirt, face swollen and bruised. "But those eyes were the same, Corey," Tobias rasped. Corey ran to him, falling to his knees. "Daddy, we found you. We're here." Tobias couldn't lift his arms, couldn't even cry, but his head tilted just enough, leaning into his son's chest. Outside, the radio chirped. Jamal and Ruth heard the words clearly. "He's alive." Maya broke down, sobbing. Tiana covered her face with both hands. Ruth wheeled forward through the mud, ignoring the agents trying to stop her. She grabbed the radio. Her voice trembled. Tobias, it's me. I'm here. Inside the chamber, Tobias's lips trembled. Ruth, they tried to erase you, she said, but I never stopped looking, and I never will. Hours passed before Tobias was freed. Paramedics rushed him to the nearest hospital with oxygen and 4 drips. Ruth rode beside him in the ambulance, holding his hand. She didn't say much, just kept whispering, "You're safe now. You're safe." He spent 3 weeks in the ICU. His legs were fractured. He had pneumonia, malnutrition, psychological trauma, but he was alive for the first 2 weeks. He barely spoke when he finally did. It was in whispers. He told them everything about Harvey Doss, about how the men on that hunting trip sold him out, lied to him, drugged him, left him in a truck that was rerouted to the first labor site. He woke up in chains, and for 10 years he was passed around like property. The man found dead in the truck. Another victim trying to escape. He'd stolen the truck, tried to flee, but overdosed on the pills. Doss's enforcers forced them to keep them docile. Clarence wasn't the only one. The feds recovered over 20 missing men and women from similar locations, but Tobias's case became the face of a scandal. Ruth refused to leave his side, even as Tobias wept during night terrors, begged for someone not to hit him. Forgot what year it was. She stayed. She wheeled beside his bed and whispered, "You're here. You're home." His children visited daily. Corey brought old family videos. Maya played a music they used to dance to. Jamal changed his bandages. Tiana worked with the legal team to make sure no one could sweep this under the rug. When Tobias was finally strong enough to sit up, they threw him a small birthday party. Though nobody cared what day it actually was, they just needed a reason to celebrate. There were balloons, cake photos, and Tobias' smile. For the first time in a decade, weeks turned into months. By summer, he could walk short distances with a cane. His hair was trimmed, his beard neat. The scars on his arms would never fade, but he no longer flinched at every sound. Ruth rolled into the kitchen one afternoon and found him standing at the stove, flipping bacon. "You trying to outcook me now," she joked. He turned and smiled, trying to catch up. In August, the DOJ filed formal charges against Harvey Doss and his enforcers over 50 counts: human trafficking, kidnapping, attempted murder. The 2 men who left Tobias behind were also arrested. After new evidence surfaced, the surveillance footage Maya recovered became the nail in the coffin at the press conference. R stood tall behind the podium, Tobias beside her. Their children lined up like a wall of strength. "They tried to erase him," she said, "but we brought him home." The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, but Ruth didn't hear them. She was watching Tobias, her husband, her love, her miracle. He held her hand like he used to, and this time he wasn't letting go. Later, as the sun dipped over the horizon, the family gathered under the old oak tree Tobias had planted when Corey was born. Grandchildren played nearby. Laughter filled the air. Tobias sat in a chair beside Ruth, his cane resting beside him. "I thought I'd never see this again," he said. "You almost didn't," she replied softly. He turned to her. "How did you not give up?" Ruth reached for his hand. Because you didn't walk away. You were taken, and I knew the world wasn't going to save you, so I had to. He kissed her knuckles. You saved me, Ruth. You brought me home. Corey passed him a camera. Come on, we need a new family photo. The timer clicked. The flash went off, and just like that, the whole family, once fractured by silence and injustice, stood whole again. Not healed, but together, and that was enough.